Six catches your hand, and for a moment, you dangle there, looking up into the shrouded face of the girl you've dragged through hell. The one who was strung up by porcelain bullies, the one who was attacked by disembodied hands and groaning monsters, the one who followed you despite you only bringing her into more and more dangerous situations. And though the two of you have never really spoken to each other, and though you cannot even fully see the girl's expression, as you hang there in her grasp, a puzzle piece clicks into place a moment too late. Six wasn't your friend. She was just someone who happened to be in the same place you were. She was never kind. She was just doing what she had to do to survive. She was never altruistic. She just knew she'd have an easier time navigating this f***ed-up world if she could count on another person. These are the realizations that come as the puzzle pieces complete the picture in your head, the one built from minor scenes of violence or cruelty or willingness to hurt people to reach her goals, and even just because. That puzzle piece allows you to finally spell out the message that has been being built in your head over the course of your entire playthrough. You shouldn't have trusted Six. She lets you go. Betrayal, remember? One of those crucial elements to watch out for. If only Mono had known. Six drops you. Why, we cannot be fully sure. She's an enigma even under the best of circumstances. But truthfully, it's a moment we should have seen coming, especially if we played the games in order. Six is so much more than just a little kid.
We tend to see ourselves as the heroes of our own story. When we decide that a belief or course of action is the correct one, whatever that word may mean in the context, then it is so. Those who work in pursuit or support of your decreed morality are the good guys, and those who do not, well, those are the bad guys. In Little Nightmares 2, we play as Mono the whole time, and only ever see things from Mono's perspective. When we're separated from Six, we see how much we have to go through to rescue her, but not what she had to go through during her own capture. When we work together with Six, we can only assume what she's thinking and hope it's similar to what we're thinking. She's a silent protagonist. We don't need to hear what Six thinks about what's happening to her because we're controlling her and should be thinking similar enough things ourselves, as long as we're properly invested. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, when Six drops us and walks away, we don't see where she goes. We don't know why she does it, why she lingered, staring at our face for so long. We only see it as a betrayal. But is it? We, playing as Mono, saw ourselves as the hero of our own story. But that was a mistake. It wasn't our story. Little Nightmares is a fictional series, but you know what's a real nightmare? Trying to deal with internet security. In a digital age, there are more monsters than ever to avoid, with an endless supply of accounts, passwords, emails, and phone numbers for creeps to peek at while you're not aware. That sounds pretty frightening to me, and that's why this video is sponsored by Aura. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. I looked up my phone number on one of the hundreds of information selling sites that anyone can access and realized that details about my life, including social media accounts, family information, and even stuff like my address, was available for purchase at a very low price. We all have gotten used to the idea that privacy is hard to come by, but seeing it all laid out like this was very spooky. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive information. Pretty recently, AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records for both existing and former customers were released on the dark web. They recommended that those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all of this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't worry because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/ConnorMcGrath to start your 2-week free trial, also linked below in the description. For all you know, your life could become a living nightmare in an instant. I can't help you with that, but thanks to Aura, you don't have to worry about the same thing happening online. I'm genuinely a really big fan of Aura, not just because their product is great, which it is, but because they've shown a clear devotion to helping support other horror creators like myself and a number of channels you probably also watch. So again, please go hit that link, and thank you so much, Aura, for sponsoring this video. Now we can get back to our video with the idea of internet insecurity drifting away like a bad dream. Welcome back, boneheads, to our in-depth look into the universe of Little Nightmares. This is part 2 of the exploration. We established a bunch of things in the first video that are going to be important to keep in mind going forward. Stuff like COHOB, an acronym I came up with to help us keep track of certain recurring themes and ideas, as well as a number of thoughts about the children, Six, and Mono, and their place in all of this. I don't think you'll be lost necessarily if you want to start with this video, and it may even make more sense, since we'll be looking a lot more closely at the first game in this one, but I'd still recommend watching the other first. For one thing, I worked really hard on it, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it, but for another thing, it also gives some context to the point I'm about to make next. I treated Six very harshly in the last video. You may have already felt me amping up to this explanation in my introduction, but here it comes. The ending of Little Nightmares 2 can be viewed in two very different ways. The first is the way I outlined in my original video, with the idea that Six has betrayed Mono and that we have been too optimistic about our relationship with her. This betrayal comes from nowhere and dooms us. This is the perspective a person will likely come to if their first game in the series is Little Nightmares 2, or I guess if they watch my first video. The second perspective, though, actually still centers around betrayal, that being Mono's betrayal of Six. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about two contrasting priorities: survival versus heroics. See, as we've laid out a bit already and will continue to unravel, it's not just one unique location in the nowhere that seems dangerous for children, it's the nowhere itself. What this means is that to survive in a place like this, one has to develop a personality or thought process that specifically works towards keeping them alive over anything else. This isn't unique to Little Nightmares, this is just what happens when you have to live long-term under stressful or dangerous conditions. In the real world, psychologists call this an enduring personality change, which is pretty self-explanatory. It seems to me that Mono and Six have both developed some pretty extreme and distinct personalities in response to the Nowhere's tomfuckery. Mono has developed a kind of hero streak and seems to be actively seeking out danger in some belief that he can change it or affect it in some way. His behavior throughout Little Nightmares 2 backs this up. He rescues Six, which is nice, but after the hunter is shot, he leads her to the city. There was nothing to indicate further monstrous adults in this forest area other than maybe some stuffed corpses in the house, but for some reason, Mono goes incredibly far out of his way to put the two of them back in the reach of danger. It may simply be the call of the signal tower influencing him, or something deeper, some fateful inevitability. Maybe there was nothing here for them, but either way, the choice is active. Six, though, has gone almost in the opposite direction. She's become avoidant, seemingly happier by herself and unnoticed. Even during her first appearance in the timeline, as the girl in white in Very Little Nightmares, she stays out of reach, helping but never going so far to put herself in real danger. And why would she? She's still alive, so something about this process has been working. It's possible to utilize your decreased size to trick and confuse opponents, but it's a lot easier to just avoid them in general. After the first couple times Mono drags Six into hell, it's not hard to understand why she'd get a little upset about it. So let's return to that moment in the tower, to Mono dangling from Six's grasp. When I narrated the scene in the last video, I narrated it from Mono's perspective, as he made a deep and horrible realization about his companion. Let's go over that scene again, considering Six's point of view. A point of view that, as many of you have pointed out in the comments of the last video, is perhaps skewed by the fact that Six doesn't recognize Mono. Before Mono entered the signal tower, he removed the bag on his head. At the time, it seemed like a moment of surrender, Mono finally letting himself be completely vulnerable to this world after an eternity of running, but maybe it was something else. When Six takes Mono's hand, does she recognize him? It's hard to say. She's never seen his face, and even though he's wearing the same clothes, and it would be a pretty strange coincidence if he was somebody else, Six has been through a lot and might not know for sure. Even if she suspects it, we already know Six tends to be overly cautious, so maybe the drop was simply a response to uncertainty. Or maybe she did recognize Mono as the Thin Man. I gotta say, it's really fun having an active comment section for videos like these, because a lot of you guys notice things that I don't, or make connections that I wouldn't. Like, for instance, the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, there is another gap of time between Six's kidnapping by the Thin Man and the point where she's rescued by Mono. During that time, it's pretty likely she'd have the opportunity to get a better look at the Thin Man, the very same Thin Man, I'll remind you, that Mono will go on to become because of these moments. In all the time that Mono's been running with Six, he's been hiding his identity. The very first time Six is really able to look at Mono's face, with him bagless and at her mercy, what if Six realizes that Mono is the same person who's been menacing her the whole time she's been in the Pale City? What if Six thinks that by doing this, she's breaking the very cycle that she's actually putting in motion? Does she realize what she's done? Violence is always a cycle. To clarify, I mean the beginning of Little Nightmares as a whole, not the timeline. If you collect all 18 of the little glitchy child souls that are scattered throughout the game, you get a special ending to Little Nightmares 2, where Six emerges from a TV alone and encounters a glitchy version of herself. That version looks towards a pamphlet on the ground, then disappears without a trace. Six looks towards the pamphlet. She's gotta keep moving, and that seems like a place enough to go. When Mono and Six pushed that door out to sea, did they realize what they were pushing towards? Who knows? The same question applies to this scene. The place that Six is going isn't a place any normal kid would ever dream of going to of their own volition. But of course, Six is not a normal kid. Little Nightmares begins with a vision. Out of a drifting, ethereal darkness emerges a figure. A woman, tall, elegant, but out of focus, shrouded in a familiar darkness and thrumming tones, turned slowly towards the camera as if becoming aware of her own observation. She almost seems to recognize the viewer, and just as we begin to make out her features, we awaken with a start. Finally, for the first time in the timeline, we control Six. For new players, this is a completely brand new character. They likely don't even know her name. But we boneheads have done the work. We know a lot about her at this point. Not enough, per se, but we're also not completely in the dark this time. We know her name, where she came from, and what she's seen. The first moments of the game are what you might expect. Quiet, in a way, and devoid of enemies, taking the time to set up the atmosphere of this location, a shifting, groaning, and of course completely oversized place called the Maw. It's the location that was depicted on the pamphlet Six found in the secret ending. Six has a light source from the beginning of the game this time, a lighter, which does very little to illuminate anything other than the spaces just in front and around the little girl in the raincoat. The empty echoes of this place, this groaning, indicative of huge steel-lined rooms and chambers, are punctuated by the quiet taps of your tiny bare feet against cold, damp metal. For first-time players, the anticipation, the intrigue, the dread, it's all palpable. The introduction to a horror game can be long, drawn out, and bring replay value to a screeching halt, or it can be like this: short, sweet, quiet, and jam-packed with subtlety. Immediately, you may notice that the environment of this game is much more industrial than its sequel. As I mentioned in the last video, this game is shorter and takes place in a much more confined location, despite its size. Because of this, there's a greater consistency to the design of every scene. Of course, in those surreal, uneven shapes that the series is known for, but also in how pipes snake through most levels, how metal and concrete make up the underbelly of this place, and how there seems to be a constant rocking, like a ship at sea. The environment of the Maw is distinct and oppressively unique. I should also note here that Six's progression through the game is sort of a climb through the hierarchy of the Maw's inhabitants. The first places you encounter are the behind-the-scenes staging areas of this place, and from there you move on to dealing with the staff for this location, then the customers, and then finally, the owner or leader of all of this. And I use the word climb very intentionally. As you'll see in this introduction, it seems like you begin the game in one of the lowest areas of the Maw, and in your path towards escape, or whatever it is you're seeking, you consistently move upwards, climbing ropes and walls, stairs, being carried by automated hooks. This is Six's climb to the top, both literally and metaphorically, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, as always. After doing some minor exploration, we come to a room with a chair, a note, and a pair of thin, dangling legs suspended above them, the rest of his body out of frame and unrecognizable. The implications of this scene are clear, but there's also a strange familiarity to it all. A comment on my last video pointed out to me that the inclusion of the chair and the distinctly thin and human-seeming legs might imply that at some point since his time in the Pale City, Mono, or the Thin Man, or whatever you prefer to call him, eventually realized the terrible nature of the cycle he was stuck in and decided to end it on his own terms. Why would he be here on the Maw? Well, who's to say? I'd be willing to guess it's for Six, not intentionally by the Thin Man himself, but rather as a sort of sign from the nowhere. Interestingly, there's actually a painting of the scene in the app Very Little Nightmares. Does this mean that the man has been hanging here since before any of the games even started? Or, more realistically, does it imply some sort of prophetic nature to this world? We already know that time functions differently in the nowhere. Maybe someone knew this man, whoever he was going to take these actions well before he did. In any case, whoever this man is, our finding him gives us a really bad feeling about what we're about to encounter. The note on the ground implies he expected to be found. By whom? We don't read the note, but someone working down here, in a place like this, surrounded by terrible monsters and scared kids, there's the implication of guilt, of no longer being able to take part in such a horrific system. Whether or not this is Mono, a point is made. During this introduction, we also meet the gnomes, these little white-hatted creatures who skitter around anxiously but seem to be mostly friendly. Six seems to have a friendly relationship with them, and you can go out of your way to hug them if you choose. It's nice. At least you have a few friendly faces around. It's kind of weird, after Little Nightmares 2, being alone like this, but I get the feeling Six is much more comfortable in this kind of situation. There's an extra layer of dwarving by the world, which obviously is so much bigger than you, but now you don't have anyone else to empathize with, to make you at least a little bigger as a unit. However, getting around, being stealthy, and not having to deal with Mono's wild streak makes the admittedly oppressive atmosphere of the game something of a safety. Sure, it's dark and scary, but you can hide in the darkness just as well, if not better, than everything else here. That point might be hard to believe, however, as from a distance, we encounter the first monstrous figure we'll have to deal with in this series. A long-limbed, blindfolded creature, dragging what looks like a cage behind him on a platform not too far above us. What could that cage be for? There's still a little we have to get through before reaching his workshop, and during that exploration, we become aware of two facts. 1, there are other kids here for sure. 2, it is not safe to be a kid here. We enter what appears to be a nursery filled with children, and though it's a strange and potentially shocking reveal, we have no time to investigate. The door opens, and we're forced to scramble for hiding place as a figure known as the Janitor enters the room. He emits a sound like creaking wooden planks as he feels around in the dark. We're not sure what he's doing here, but even by this point we know better than to panic and sprint away. We've got to be stealthy now. After we avoid him the first time, something unexpected happens. Six's stomach starts growling. I guess in all the time we've spent with her, we've never really seen her eat. Usually that's just video game logic. Unless it's part of the healing system or something, you can just accept that your protagonist doesn't have to eat. But of course, in this universe, consumption, and the differences between the ways people do it, is a big deal, and so the fact that Six hasn't eaten anything is a problem. She walks slowly, in pain, through the room as a ravenous hunger overtakes her, and she's lucky enough to be thrown a piece of bread by a shrouded kid in the other room. There's no further communication between the two, but it's a rare moment of benevolence. Fun fact, in the Little Nightmares wiki, that boy is simply called the bread-giving boy. Accurate. We have another moment of hunger a little while later after doing some more work to advance through the maw. This time, though, we're not in a place where any altruistic child can help us. We're deep in the hall, away from everyone, or so we thought. There's a moment, limping in your hunger, that you encounter an open cage with a piece of meat in it. Six isn't stupid. She knows that this has to be a trap, just as we as the player know it's a trap, but the hunger is too great. She must eat. It doesn't matter the consequences. And so you enter the cage and begin to eat. And just as you do, a long, lanky hand shuts the door, and the scene ends. We wake up in a room surrounded by other children in cages. One of them is being dragged away by those same long limbs. We need to find out where. Six manages to escape, and instead of helping her fellow captives, decides to drag one of the filled cages over towards a lever so she can escape. It's cold, sure, but what is Six gonna do? Try to guide 5 or 6 kids through extreme danger, all while dealing with hunger and monsters much larger than her? She's already tried traveling with another, and she's over it. In the next room, we see what the janitor is doing with the kids. As we sneak by him at his workbench, we see him pull the limp form of a child from a collection and begin wrapping it. Hooks on an automatic conveyor belt pass over him. Something about the scene, about the way the corpses are being prepared, starts to put a dreadful feeling in your gut. We narrowly avoid the janitor again, escaping through an air duct, and find ourselves in a new location. One that... Jesus Christ. Okay, fair warning, I'm going to briefly talk about something very real and potentially very upsetting. So if you're just here for the little nightmare stuff, skip to this time code. If you've never been to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., this imagery might not be quite as hard-hitting as it would be otherwise, but let me explain what's happening here. There's a rather famous exhibit in the museum which many people refer to as the Last Witnesses exhibit, which is simply an exhibit that has been filled with the shoes of Jewish people who were killed in concentration camps during the Holocaust. It's an extremely horrifying exhibit, as it only represents a fraction of the lives lost during that time, and on the wall of that exhibit is a haunting poem by Yiddish poet Moses Schulstein that reads as follows: "We are the shoes, we are the last witnesses. We are shoes from grandchildren and grandfathers, from Prague, Paris, and Amsterdam. And because we are only made of fabric and leather, and not of blood and flesh, each one of us avoided the hellfire." It is an exhibit and poem that uniquely illustrate just how horrible these killings were, how senseless, how non-human they were. That might seem like a silly statement. Of course the killings were horrific, but it's more than that. The Nazis weren't just killers, they were thieves too. And as that poem lays out, the fact that the Nazis kept the shoes but killed the people wearing them is heartbreaking. Now, the inclusion of this kind of imagery is sort of strange in this game, and it's clearly pretty loaded. I don't think this setting is going so far as to overtly politicize the actions of the monsters in this game, or to imply that this game as a whole is a Holocaust metaphor. However, it does serve to recontextualize the scale and brutality of the operation. This isn't just a few kids, it isn't just you. This inclusion makes its point clear and unavoidable. This is a genocide, and it's happening to kids. They're seen as expendable, a product, livestock. Before we even know what is fully being done to these children, we know how horrible it must be. Their shoes and suitcases and whatever else they have are tossed aside as their personality and personhood is stripped away from them, and they just become another corpse in the process. And as we process this, even being pursued by an unknown entity beneath the massive faded leather, a new reaction begins to spark. Anger. You really can't catch a break from the janitor by this point. He pursues you frantically throughout stages and rooms, and the only way you manage to survive is by abusing the fact that apparently this guy is blind. On first glance, it almost looks like he's hiding his eyes with a blindfold, but further inspection proves that he has none in the first place, that it's actually his face, or maybe a mask, slipping away from the strange, smooth marble that is his real skull. What this means is that you can walk right in front of the janitor, as long as you do so quietly, and with this new information, we manage to start making some progress as we move forward. You hide beneath floorboards, in cubbies and adjacent rooms as you work to avoid the janitor until finally he corners you in a room with a falling heavy metal door. You're able to slide under completely, but the janitor can only get his lanky arms through. The door is being held up by a damaged cage, and as the janitor feels around the room, something hits you. This man, the one who's been chasing you, the one who likely filled that room with shoes in the first place, who has sent child after child to their death, if not killing them himself, can't see you, and further, can't see what you're doing to the cage under the door. Winston Churchill once said, "Beware of driving men to desperation. Even a cornered rat is dangerous." Churchill was a British leader during World War II. Those words were not spoken without experience. It's hard being the little guy. It's hard existing at the whims of everyone else just because they're bigger than you. Not smarter, not better, just bigger. People can get away with doing whatever they want to you because what are you going to do about it? What can you do about it? The greatest strength that any child has is their understanding that they're being underestimated. Enough is enough. Obviously, this is not the first time 6 has been violent in the timeline. We covered in the last video a couple instances where 6 exhibited violent tendencies. However, most of these were vague and random, or part of a larger sequence of actions that Mono was also a part of. This is, however, the first time in-game, and it sets a tone for the rest of the game that is really fascinating to consider. No matter how you feel about 6 and what she's capable of, you have to admit that for the majority of the time we've spent with her in this series, she's been a victim. She's been trapped multiple times, attacked, mutated, and so on and so forth. There's rarely a time where 6 is fully in control of the situation, as is just the nature of the nowhere, and this fact is likely what led to her being such a reserved and cautious explorer. However, now, after this fight with the janitor, hearing his cries of pain from behind the shut door as we continue onwards, I feel a new emotion begins to settle onto 6's shoulders. Frustration. Not at anyone in particular, but rather at the world, at every monster as a whole, and maybe even herself. She's been traveling for so long and in so many different places, but every time, no matter what, the story is always the same. She's always on the run, always being chased, always having to fight just to exist in a world that seems entirely made up of problems and zero solutions. She's always hid, always preferred avoiding the danger, going in the opposite direction, leaving well enough alone, but it doesn't work. Not really. Of course, she's alive, but she's menaced by these towering figures every day. Something has to change, and if it's not going to be the world, it's going to have to be her. 6 has to stop being a pushover. Before 6 moves on to the next full stage, she becomes hungry again. There's no bread boy or convenient trap this time. There's only a cornered rat. Desperation drives people to do some pretty scary things. The twins are grotesque. Their eyes roll back in their heads as if they're in a trance. They move in jerky, uncontrolled motions, and their voices are these breathy, squeaking croaks of exertion and raw emotion. Dealing with the chefs actually takes a lot less than dealing with the janitor. While they can see, their range of motion is pretty limited, and in this sense, 6 is able to return to a style of avoidance that's much more typical for her. Sprinting, climbing, and sliding out of the way of reach works very well with these lads in particular, and the only real threat to consider specifically is the fact that there are 2 of them to account for. However, the twin chefs seem uncomfortably close, so getting them apart isn't really the most effective course of action. Better to just use their size and speed against them, ducking out of the way before they can catch you and sprinting away when they do. It is during your exploration of the chef's kitchen that you may put together what exactly the janitor was packaging those children for, and why so many kids are being kept in cages down below. There's a lot of meat in the kitchen, some of which appears to be seafood, but most of which doesn't. There's been no indication of actual livestock up until this point, and it makes sense that you would have encountered it if it were here on your way up to the kitchen, so the meat must be coming from somewhere else. Probably the meat hooks. The ones the janitor was putting the kids on after he finished wrapping them up. Watching the chefs chop brutally at the meat on the table as if they're angry at it, or maybe taking pleasure in the process, hits different now that we know what the meat might be. You may also notice during this section how occasionally the chefs will reach up under their faces and scratch at something. They're wearing masks. There is so much to the enemies in this game, in the way that they're presented and their mysteries are hidden from us. Learning that the chefs are wearing masks actually doesn't tell us anything about their characters or their place in the game. It really only brings up more questions and makes the setting feel that much more alien and surreal. Are the people who hide their identities in this way ashamed of the way they look? Are they worried they'll be recognized by someone? Have they been compelled by another force to act this way? We can really only guess, and it's these kind of thoughts that we're having as we scramble our way through the kitchens and lockers until we finally reach the end of the stage, pursued manically by the twin chefs, and are able to ride the meat hooks to safety. We don't kill the chefs, but their cries of anger and frustration as we drift further and further out of their reach is nearly as satisfying as that action might have felt. But it's time to see who they were cooking for. Holy shit, we're in the middle of the ocean. This reveal is pretty stunning, especially the way it introduces us to the antagonist of the next stage. See, we likely could have guessed from the motion of the camera and some other environmental clues that we are out at sea, but the reveal of these people arriving via ship from somewhere else to this secluded and horrible spot right out in the middle of the sea, it paints a clear picture about what exactly is going on. This place, the Maw, it's a place you go when you want to do terrible things with little repercussions. The Maw is a cannibalistic vacation destination, and the tourists are looking hungry. But who could have, or rather, would have set up a place like this? As we climb further and further into the Maw, we see her. Briefly silhouetted in the window, the woman from our dream at the beginning. She's looking down at the shambling patrons as they pass by below her, her face still shrouded. There's something different about her. She has a calmness about her, a distinct aura of control that no other monster has ever exhibited, but we'll get to her in a moment. First, we have to make our way through the feast. Our suspicions about this place are quickly proven correct as we leave our view of the lady and continue into the center of the main event. These bulbous figures are sat at tables everywhere, loaded with only meat and wine, and they shovel food into their mouth with such avarice and desperation that it's almost like they've never eaten before in their lives, and yet of course that couldn't be true, not with their statures and clear familiarity with this environment. Their desperation is founded on the quality of their meat. They don't get to have food like this anywhere else. As you pass by these creatures, the ones that notice you become immediately and incredibly aggressive, knocking over furniture and kitchenware as they crawl after you, licking their lips maniacally and stirring the whole collective into a chaos, like a feeding frenzy of bulbous sharks. They almost lose their human quality by the end of this pursuit and take on more of the identity of a wave, a singular flowing mass of hungry flesh. It's oddly similar to the ending of Little Nightmares 2, except the stakes of this chase are so much clearer. There's food all around them, but they only want you. You escape, barely, and I love this moment where one of your pursuers falls over the edge of the railing as you avoid their reach. You had to do some mono-ass shit to get through this scene, getting right up close and personal with these people as you run on their tables, jump on their backs, and generally just outsmart them without spending any time on stealth. Maybe there's something to be said about direct action. Maybe you can do something to change this place. Not the Nowhere as a whole, that would be ridiculous, but maybe just the Maw. There has to be a solution here, a reason that things have happened to you in this way, in this order. But you're hungry again. It's worse than it's ever been. You encounter a gnome. A friendly face, thank God. He's holding a sausage. He even has food for you. You approach him and take the— Oh my God! What? Oh my God! What? Why did— 6? Alright, so here we go. Let's address this. Remember that introduction I gave about reinterpreting Little Nightmares 2 from 6's perspective and trying to be more forgiving than I was in my first video? I have a confession. All of that was a lie, and I knew it when I was writing it because of this moment right here. Every person in my comments who likes 6 over Mono loves to imply that 6 isn't a cruel or evil person, she's just a child making a quick decision about a person who admittedly did put her in a lot of danger. However, what the fuck is this scene then? What part of this decision can be explained as pragmatic or normal for a kid to do? The gnome was literally holding food out to her, and she ate him. This wasn't even one of the enemies who's been menacing her. The gnomes in these games have only been nice to you. Even as a product of trauma, which that's not what this is, are you kidding me? This type of action can only be described as malicious. There's simply no other word for it. So, I'm gonna go ahead and stand by one of my final conclusions from the first video and restate it here, not directed towards the character Mono this time, but you, the player, who has likely spent your entire playthrough believing you understand 6 as her controller. But you aren't her controller. You didn't make the choice to eat the gnome, she did. And therefore your connection to her isn't what you thought it was, and therefore my original claim of you shouldn't have trusted 6 is still pretty goddamn accurate. And by the way, before I get the comment, she's been dealing with a lot and isn't thinking clearly, let me get ahead of that and say, that's dumb. Eating another person is pretty morally black and white, and yes, the gnomes are people. The DLC proves this. Anyway, I needed to get that off my chest, especially since so many of the comments called me out for not analyzing 6 properly. Oh, by the way, she's gonna eat another person. So, here we are. The end of the game, finally facing the last boss, the taste of gnomish blood still fresh on our lips. The lady is unlike any Little Nightmares character we've ever seen, in this game or the next. She is thin, controlled, and more human in her appearance than anything we've ever seen. I'd like now to bring your attention to a pretty popular theory regarding Six and the lady, and explain why people think that Six might be her daughter, or something similar to that. As you navigate the lady's bedroom, you might notice a number of pictures hanging on the walls, some of which are obscured with sheets. There are 3 specifically that people tend to point out. On the stairs, there's an image of what looks like the lady and 4 other similar figures. This obviously adds up to 5, and considering that your name is Six, is it possible that you were supposed to be the next in that group of figures, whatever they might represent? In an empty bedroom that might belong to the lady, but more realistically belong to someone else, there's a painting of a little girl in a ratty white dress. You may recall that all the way back in Very Little Nightmares, the character that was revealed to be Six was referred to, at the time, as the girl in white, and had a similar white dress. Just beneath the picture of the girl in white is an obscured painting of another child. Most of the painting is hidden, and you can't make out the features of the child. However, you can make out the shape and color of their clothes, which appears to be a yellow raincoat, or at least something similar. There are also clear marks on the wall nearby implying that paintings were at one point hanging, likely for a while, before being taken down and covered up. If Six was the lady's daughter and she ran away or betrayed her for some reason, maybe she was so distraught that she couldn't bear to look at her face anymore. Perhaps the reason Six came to the Maw in the first place is to finally face the truth about herself she was too afraid to back in the day. I don't know if I believe this theory. I think it's interesting, and I think that if it is true, it explains a lot, but Little Nightmares is sort of defined by its ambiguity, at least now. What is really interesting is the way that the lady seems obsessed with her appearance, but always breaks her mirrors. What does she see that upsets her so much? You face off against the lady. It feels oddly inevitable when it happens, as if everything has been leading up to this, and even Six knows it. The atmosphere almost implies that this interaction with the lady has been what everything was leading up towards, that this fight is intentional in a way that every other before was not. Those fights were for survival. This one is for control. You use a mirror against the woman as she circles you, teleporting in and out of view, attempting to rush you, and each time you hold her appearance up to her, it seems to hurt her, until finally, the mirror shatters in your hands, and the lady collapses to the floor. You consume her, much in the same way you did the gnome, and as you do, her power, this drifting darkness, fills you. This consumption isn't just a killing blow. You're taking something from her, becoming something different. After everything you've been through, this game and the last and the app, and who even knows before that, you finally put your foot down and refuse to be a victim anymore. And that means refusing to be a child, or at least just a child. There's no place for regular children in this world, and so you stop being one, if you could ever claim to have been one in the first place. As a new power fills your tiny body, you look back at the camera, slowly, intentionally, just like the woman did in your vision at the very beginning of the game. Violence is always a cycle. As you leave the Maw, walking slowly to the front door, you pass by all the cannibals again. Each of them reach for you, desperate and hungry, but you pay them no mind. That darkness that came to you, it remains with you now, and every disgusting man and woman that you pass, that want only to decimate you into nothing more than filling for their stomachs, dies at your feet, killed by the power of the very woman who brought them here, who made their violence possible. It is exactly what they deserve. And with that, Six is free. Free to do what, or to go where? Well, maybe the new game will tell us. You may have noticed that this video is almost over, and I still haven't talked about the podcast or the DLC, and haha, surprise! There's actually going to be one more video in this series, kind of acting as a wrap-up and touching on everything I missed or haven't gotten to. The series just has so many mysteries to look into, and your comments on the last video gave me so much to think about for this one that I wanted to give myself and all of you one more opportunity to theorize, correct, and simply enjoy this game's universe before we close the book on the series, at least until Little Nightmares 3. So, thank you for sticking with me through 2 long-ass videos, and hopefully you enjoyed them, or at least found them informative. I love this series, and it's been really fun devoting this much time to it. I've got some other videos in the works that may come out before the finale to this series. However, I promise that there's still a little more to analyze from this nightmarish universe. I'll see you next time, Boneheads.